of everybody. We'll wait for everybody to roll in here. Don't think we're going to start with everybody. I had a couple people email me and say they're going to be a little bit late, but should be no worries there. All right, we got a few. Finish firing off an email here, and hopefully by the time I'm done with that, everybody will be good to go. Hopefully we'll have a full class by then. All right, so let's see. I had an email from one, two, three. All right, I think we should be still waiting on one person. We'll get started here in like a minute or two if they don't show up. In the meantime, I'll get my PowerPoints ready to go here. Can everybody hear me just fine? All right, awesome. All right, I will share my screen here. Go with, there it is. Okay, I'll move it over here. So there we go. Did that stop sharing just now? No, you can still see my PowerPoint? Okay, awesome. Oh, wait, hang on. It says pause. Is everybody still seeing the PowerPoint, or are you seeing like a different screen?
PowerPoint.
Okay, you can still see the PowerPoint, awesome. All right, let's get a rolling here. So you'll recall that last week we went chapter 1 and then chapter 3 and chapter 4. We skipped chapter 2. And that's because it kind of, in my opinion, stands alone. And while it sort of relates to what we talked about first week, it's not quite as important in my eyes. So we'll do chapter 2, chapter 5, and chapter 6 today. So, all right. Chapter 2 is the ACE Integrated Fitness Training Model. So remember when I said last week that ACE likes to kind of make up their own lingo and sort of make up some terms and things that they expect you to know for their test. This entire chapter is basically one of those. So this is not something that every personal training certification will have. It's kind of more of a directly related to ACE. So they have a lot of lingo in here. Yeah, let's get into it. So we'll talk about what does the term integrated fitness mean to you? You know, we can kind of talk about that a little bit. Basically, sort of like we talked about last week, where every aspect of healthcare, whether that be, you know, doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, everybody has their own role to play in this like overall healthcare system. So that's sort of what they're getting at here. I've got to fix it. There we go. There we go. All right. So personal training has changed quite a bit in the last, you know, 20 years or so. It's not a very old profession anyway, just because for a majority of human history, people have had real work to do. And that's sort of the joke about personal training is like our entire job is to give people fake work to do because they don't have to do real work in their jobs anymore. And so whereas most people at the onset of personal training, it was more about getting fit people to be more fit. Now it's more about getting unhealthy people and sedentary people just moving in any way possible. So in some ways, it's made our job a lot easier because it doesn't take much to move somebody from unfit to fit. And in some ways, it's made it harder because now we have things like motivation to deal with and health issues that go along with that. And additionally, the increasingly overweight population has certainly played a huge factor. Although it is a bit of a tragedy, you can kind of see it as job security if you're a personal trainer. So like we talked about, personal training is changing. So now we're looking at instead of, you know, developing bigger muscles and hoping to be stronger, a lot of our work is designed to just make people be able to live better. They can have a higher resting metabolic rate. They know how to sit up straight in their desk. They are healthy structurally and functionally. So research on health behavior has shown that personal trainers can build client self-efficacy, and we should be focusing on program adherence. So I kind of talked about that last week a little bit. You know, it doesn't matter if we write the best program in the world if we don't have clients who stick to it, right? If we don't make it fun for them and interesting for them, it's gonna be very tough for them to make any lasting progress, even if it is a really well-written program. Let me try and change my display settings here. There we go. All right. That's going to be much easier for me. Sorry about that, guys. I'm on a different setup than I was last week. So, yeah. All right, so in the past, the training parameters that we were looking to improve were very basic ones, like the very beginning, the health parameters that are kind of laid out by the ACSM, right? And that's cardiorespiratory fitness or aerobic fitness, how well your heart and lungs can get oxygen to your entire body, muscular endurance, so how long your muscles can perform any given task, muscular strength, so how much force your muscles can produce, and flexibility, which is pretty obvious. And now ACE wants to talk about these contemporary training parameters, which are a lot more multifaceted. So you can see all of these here, right? A lot more to think about. But at the same time, these are kind of very common sense sort of things. I mean, they use big words like kinetic chain mobility and postural stability, but really that just means people know how to move well. So I think we have a discussion question coming up. As somebody who's getting into personal training, what sort of impact do these new training parameters have on your future responsibilities? You know, how do you see the future of personal training ending up, and does this make you more excited? Would you rather work with people who are already fit and looking to get more fit, or would you rather work with people who maybe aren't so interested in fitness and make a lasting change in their life? Let's go ahead and discuss.
I think that it could be either way, because if you're always training people who are like super fit, you're not going to see you'll obviously see a difference, but it's not going to be like a lifestyle change where you're helping someone go from unhealthy to healthy. Whereas if you're only working with unhealthy people, a lot of the time, they're not going to do it for the long term. So that'll also be upsetting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great answer. Anybody else want to chime in?
I think I personally would rather work with already fit people and help them optimize even more. I'm much more interested in exercise and building muscle than I am with fat loss.
Right.
I think I'm a mix of the two. I really enjoy seeing the mental change within no matter who it is. So if it's a super fit person who has gotten injured, who I help build their confidence back, or if it's an obese person who ends up losing a ton of weight, I'm more passionate about how you view yourself, exercise, and those things. So I don't know. I think I'm a mix between the two.
I feel like a mix of the two would be more entertaining and keep you on your toes more, because you won't be doing kind of the same aspect repetitively. It'll a nice balance of the two would keep you entertained.
All right. All great answers. And you guys are all absolutely right. I mean, it's very rewarding to work with both, certainly. You know, to see that you've made a really lasting change in somebody's life when they come to you unfit and not really interested in exercise. And even if they still aren't really interested in exercise, you can sort of see their life improve. That's a really meaningful thing. You know, you feel like you've actually made a difference. But at the same time, it can be really fun to work with somebody who has the same interest as you, right? Like they want to lift weights to get better at lifting weights, or they are interested in training because they want to look better, and maybe compete at something. So both have their advantages and disadvantages, and you'll certainly in your time as a personal trainer get to work with both, whether you choose to or not. Okay. So let's dive into some information that ACE has. So this is the kind of the stuff I'm talking about where maybe I don't think it's the most perfect model, but it is what ACE presents, and we should know it if we're going to do any good on the test, on the exam. So function, health, fitness, performance continuum. So ACE views any given client as they're going to fall somewhere on this continuum when they come to you. So some people might already be healthy and they need to work on their fitness. Great. Some people are already fit and they want to be able to perform. Great. Some people are very unhealthy and we just need to be able to establish proper function. So people will come to you at different stages on this continuum, and your job is to kind of assess where they are and put them in the right sort of training program in order to get them to that next stage. So we're trying to reestablish proper function, improve health, develop and advance fitness, and enhance performance. This part is a little bit new within the last, I don't even think it was in last year's training course. So, but basically what they have here is they're calling it the ACE mover method. And they have this, the integrated fitness training model, or IFT model, has been what they've always called it, but I'm not really entirely sure where this new mover method information is coming from. But they view, two different aspects of fitness, right? Cardiorespiratory training and muscular training. And somebody might come to you and they're in a very advanced stage in muscular training, but a very basic stage in cardiorespiratory training. And they might not be really interested in cardiorespiratory training or not interested in muscular training, but your job is to kind of assess where they're at along the way and give them the right sort of training to correspond with where they're at. So on the cardiorespiratory training side, right, you have your very base level fitness that would just be like walking, right? Getting from place to place, being able to live a healthy life. Then fitness, we can start talking about like improving their VO2 max, getting them in a little bit more, they can go for longer and whatnot. And then performance is really pushing the boundaries. This would be like trying to make sports improvements or things like that. And muscular training, we start off with functional. So, how well do they move, right? We're not putting a lot of load on things. It's more like just making sure that they can do a step up even without weight, or they can get themselves up off the ground if they fell or something like that. And then movement is a little bit more like we can make those things more complex. So let's say maybe we were doing a squat before. Now we're doing a rear foot elevated Bulgarian split squat, right? So we take away one point of contact and make it a little bit more complex. And then the load and speed component of this would be obviously like heavier resistance training, training to be stronger or training to be faster, like more powerful. So that's kind of how ACE lays it out. Certainly you'll get clients who come to you who have a goal that includes load and speed training, and they're not yet where ACE would describe them to be functional yet. And that is the one downfall I see with this sort of system, where like it's great if you had all the time in the world, you would like to make sure somebody moves well first and you don't do anything else besides moving well. But that's really hard to keep people motivated if all you ever do in your exercise sessions with them is practice movement and do like flow exercises and whatnot. Like people want to lift some weights. They want to feel like they've done something. They want to leave the session feeling accomplished. And sometimes if they're not tired at the end of that, however good the training was and however, even if it is what they really needed, sometimes it's hard to get people to adhere to that. So do keep that in mind, that maybe you might have to start at a higher stage, but you just have to, keep the client's training history and fitness level in mind when you're programming those sorts of things. So we just kind of covered this. I just talked about that. This kind of goes into it a little bit more. Well, actually, doesn't really say anything about it. So ACE focuses on a client-centered approach, and we talked about this a little bit last week with rapport, right? Just building the trust of your client. So the rapport component is how much does the client value your information, what you're telling them. everybody knows what trust is. And then empathy is being able to put yourself in that client's shoes and understand what they're feeling. And maybe that doesn't even mean you give them a solution, but just being there for them. You know, if it's not a fitness sort of issue, if you're just kind of their counselor for the day, or just somebody to talk to, you shouldn't be their counselor because that would be outside of your scope of practice, like we talked about last week. But you understand where I'm going with this. Let's not talk about this. I will get some discussion here in just a little bit, just to kind of make sure you guys aren't falling asleep on me. But like I said, I don't really think the eighth mover method is all that valuable in the first place, although you should know it. All right, so here's where we want to talk a little bit. What steps can you take to build rapport with clients? So just a little bit of a flashback to last week. What are some things that you can do to make your clients value what you have to say a little bit more? Anybody?
Well, the biggest thing is help them achieve results, whether that's you know, adjusting your plan for them based on what their adaptations. Adaptations. There we go.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
I knew what you meant.
My brain's a little fuzzy right now at this point.
That's okay.
Anyway, basically changing your plan based on adaptations of the client, so that they're more likely to see results.
Yeah, great answer. Absolutely. Thank you, Sydney.
I would also, or sorry, I'll go first. All right. I think a good thing that you can do is kind of explain why you're doing like the exercises that they're doing. And I mean, you don't want to overdo it to the fact, or to the point that they're bored, but give them a general like understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer, right? Cluing them into what exactly is going on, why you're doing what you're doing, and making sure they're not just like, oh, okay, well, they told me to do that, so I guess I'll do it. Some clients are that way, and they don't want to think, they just want you to tell them what to do, but it is nice to kind of clue them and give them some explanation. Anybody else want to add?
I was going to say it's also important to have that professional boundary with your clients, and kind of show up like with your first impressions and being like, this is how it's going to work. And, you know, I won't step your boundaries. You won't step over mine, like kind of creating that like bubble, like don't cross it. So I think that's important too. And also like being professional and organized, like showing up on time and like doing all those things so that they like have reliability with you.
Yep, so that's a great answer, and that's actually exactly what I think of when I read this question. You know, showing that your client that although you are approachable and you're there to help them and be a smiling face, like this is how you make money, and you're an expert at it. So presenting yourself appropriately with your dress, showing up on time, you know, setting that professional boundary. Excellent answer, Carly. Nice job. All right, let's move on here. I just want to make sure, are you guys seeing just the whole slide, or are you seeing like a black screen with a slideshow over here and then some more information over here?
The whole slide.
Okay, awesome. I got two monitors going here, and I just wanted to make sure you guys are seeing what I think you're seeing. You never know what's going to be on that other monitor. So having a goal for every session. That's a very broad kind of topic, and it can mean different things, you know, having an actual training goal or having more of like a mental goal. So this slide kind of covers both, right? You're including programming that challenges them. They don't feel as if it's a waste of their time. They want to come back. You know, they had fun, and they're ready for more. Everything that you do starts at an achievable level for them. It's not totally outside of what they're capable of. If you know that a client doesn't move well, if you know a client is like overweight or whatnot, maybe don't program pull-ups. or maybe you wrote down pull-ups, but when you explain it to them, you know that you're going to do lat pull downs or something similar, right? Just having a plan that is achievable and starting your client off too easy rather than too difficult. And then your progressions should be matched to how the client progresses. So, you know, if somebody's making really light work of a weight, add a little bit more weight, but maybe don't crush them right away. So, and that can start from the very first session, right? Making sure that although you don't know exactly where this person is at yet, you start them off kind of easy, and then you can kind of ease into a little bit more challenging material. The notes for this slide kind of mentioned fitness assessments. At the rec, our personal training team does kind of promote fitness assessments. However, they're not entirely necessary for a lot of clients. Just being able to take a look at how somebody moves in a lot of cases is enough. So just making sure, yes, you can squat, yes, you can press your arms up overhead. Just yes, you know how to hinge at the hip and keeping your back straight. Just understanding how your client moves and what sorts of things you can and can't do with them on day one would be the most important. So I wouldn't worry too much about actual fitness assessments. And we'll talk about sort of like medical clearance in the later slides, I believe today. I think that's today. We don't have a video. I don't want to mess with this. This IFT model is in the ReggieNet week 2 folder, so you can check that out. And I would check it out as far as study materials for the quiz or for the test, the exam, personal trainer exam. However, I don't think it's like need to know information for being a good personal trainer. So we talked about this earlier. It almost feels like these slides are in the wrong order, but this is how I got them. So we talked earlier about the 3 levels of cardiorespiratory and muscular training. So this kind of dives into that a little bit more. So you can see the different areas that they focus on in each. So this is very moderate to low intensity cardiorespiratory exercise and base training, right? Everything that you could do, people should be able to talk to you without like taking big breaths in between. And then when you progress, you're just increasing duration and frequency rather than intensity. I don't know, we haven't quite covered that yet, but we always want to make sure that frequency is the first thing that we increase. Right? We don't want to start with intensity. We just kind of build out that base of how many times we're doing it and how much we're doing, as opposed to jacking up the intensity right away. Because we want to make sure people can recover for the next bout of exercise. And then from there, we're progressing to fitness training, which is a little bit more vigorous intensity. So you'll see these RPE scales, and that's something to keep in mind. There are 2 different RPE scales. There's the Borg scale, which actually goes from 6 to 20. And for a very, very long time, that's what everybody used. And I'm happy to say that the RPE scale is going more to that modified 1 to 10, which makes a lot more sense. The Borg scale does make some sense in clinical applications because whatever the number is roughly corresponds to a heart rate. So let's say I was at an RPE 10, my heart rate would be around 100, or at least if I was rating it correctly, it would be, right? If I was RPE 6, my heart rate would be around 60, RPE 20, around 200. You guys get the idea. But the 1 to 10 scale is a lot more applicable. It has a lot more applications. You can use it not just in cardiorespiratory exercise, but also when you're rating how hard things were for resistance training. And that can kind of go into repetitions in reserve, but we'll talk about that at a later date, or maybe not even at all, because it won't be on the exam. Yeah. So this is above that talk test that we talked about earlier. So if you're talking to them, they would be kind of in short bouts. Like they would get a few words out and then get another few words out, right? That's VT1, so ventilatory threshold 1, and VT2, ventilatory threshold 2. And those correspond to some physiological occurrences, but let's not worry about that for the moment. And so then performance training, so then you're progressing into some vigorous intensity exercise, mostly vigorous intensity exercise. You're getting a little bit more volume for them to achieve whatever their fitness goals are. So we're now no longer just talking about being healthy. We're talking about like actually really pushing those fitness boundaries. A little bit more near maximal and maximal intensity. So RPE 7 to 10. Some intervals. So above that lactate threshold to increase aerobic capacity, speed, and performance. And we can talk a little bit more about periodization at that time. So it's very rare that as a personal trainer at Campus Rec, you would actually get somebody with like performance goals in like a cardiorespiratory sense. Like nobody wants to get a personal trainer to tell them, you know, how fast to run on a treadmill. You want to actually be involved with them. So I wouldn't worry too much about this from a training aspect, but it is good to know for the exam. And muscular training, what we all care about. So it starts with functional training, focusing on establishing good posture and mobility throughout all the parts that matter. Should be focused a lot on muscular endurance, some flexibility, because chances are if people are coming to you and need functional training, they're not very flexible. And then balance. So especially in older populations, balance is very important. And then you can kind of increase that volume and how challenging it is. Now that doesn't mean how intense it is, but just simply how challenging it is. So although something like a Bulgarian split squat with the rear foot elevated might be challenging because it challenges your balance, it's not more intense because there's not more load on your body. Or there is more load on the one leg, but as far as like the actual weight being used. So then movement training is next. And so then we start talking about developing good movement patterns without compromising those static positions that we talked about earlier. So we start including exercises for all 5 primary movement patterns. We'll talk about that in a later episode because I would disagree that there's 5 primary movement patterns, but that's how ACE defines it. So that's how we're going to talk about it. And then we're integrating functional training exercises that we already talked about earlier to maintain those gains that they had already made. All right, give me just a second. I want to turn off my headset because it's running out of battery, and I'll go to the speaker on my computer.
All right, can everybody hear me just fine? All right, awesome. So then we get to talk about that load and speed training. Oops, there we go. And this is what most people are talking about when they're talking about muscular training, right? So resistance training, dumbbells, barbells, resistance training machines, bands, things like that. So we're talking about applying load to external objects in order to create force and train our body to move with more force. So there's those 5 primary movement patterns again. We're going to still keep those functional training exercises, but now we can load them a little bit and make them a little bit more diverse. We're going to focus on adequate resistance. And then if you have some athletes with you, they might do some power training. And so that would be, you know, maybe a little bit lighter weights, moving it faster. But still with those less reps. So if you talk about strength training, Maybe you're talking about 4 to 6 reps for 4 to 6 sets at 70 to 85%. And those are just some general numbers. You don't have to memorize those or anything. But for power training, you might do more sets, say 8 to 10, maybe 6 to 10, 6 to 12, could be a lot. Sets of less reps, so think 1 to 3. And those would actually be at lighter weights, even though you could handle more for the number of reps that you're doing. The whole idea is you're moving it fast. And there are definitely different spots along that continuum that we can talk about. There's a whole lot going on these days with velocity-based training that is very interesting to me, at least, and I hope it's interesting to you. And I would love to, in that 7th and 8th week of this class, when we actually don't have any specific PowerPoints to cover, start covering some of that stuff, and we can kind of learn together on that. But we'll talk about that in the future. Don't worry about that. There's our summary for this PowerPoint. So basically, sort of talking about what we talked about last time. You got to figure out those behavior change strategies and apply them to a really well-designed program. The ACE IFT model is kind of designed to help you do that. If you follow it, it should kind of help you out, but just keep in mind that just like any doctrine, it does kind of have some flaws. Okay, no homework because that's not in this. Let's get chapter 5 up here. There we go. Oops. There we go. You guys see chapter 5, pre-participation health screening on there? All right. So I do just want to clarify, I kind of forgot to talk about this first week. What we're talking about right now is kind of boring, but it's the stuff that you need to know. All right, let me level with you. It's really boring, but it's the stuff you need to know to kind of cover your rear end in the personal training world. Because it doesn't matter how much you know or how great a trainer you are if you're not allowed to train people because you broke some rules, even if they were silly rules. So pre-participation health screening, this is just a little bit of information about how to make sure that your clients aren't going to keel over on you while you're training them. A lot of the things in here are tough to memorize. Like, I don't expect that you are all going to know what every medication does to a certain person's resting heart rate and how that impacts your training, right? There's a lot of medications out there. You're not going to memorize them all, but it is good to know just some very broad categories and how that might affect training plans. So before we get into this, let's talk about why do you guys think it might be important to have some sort of health screening before you start training clients? I did just kind of give the answer away a little bit ago, but hopefully you guys were sleeping and you just woke up.
Well, if things go wrong, you could get in trouble. Like you said last week, people like to do.
Second, hang on a second, Sydney. Let me turn it up here a little bit. I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Where do I go here? All right, now go ahead. There we go.
Good. Yeah. You hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Cool. Sorry. Well, like you said last week, people like to sue. And you could potentially get that person who just thinks they're totally invincible, completely ignores any kind of condition they might have, doesn't tell you about it, and then your ignorance gets them hurt, and then they get mad at you. Everything goes down the tubes.
Yep. So that's basically all there is to it. You gotta protect yourself. You gotta make sure you're not gonna get sued. And besides that, we do want to look out for the health of the client. Even if, maybe they aren't gonna sue you, we just would like to not ever be put in that situation where we have some sort of incident. It's bad for business. So just making sure people are fit and healthy and ready to, right, they're prepared to train. They're healthy enough to train with you. So a pre-participation health screening is based on, how much people have done in the past, right? Their current level of activity, any sort of conditions they might have, and then what sort of exercise intensity they're trying to get out of these training sessions. So everything that we cover in here is going to be basically based on the ACSM recommendations. And if you're an exercise science major, you'll probably get I wonder if I have it around here. You'll probably get this tiny little purple book. That's the ACSM recommendations for exercise testing and prescription. And all of this information is going to be in there. That's good study materials. You're going to need it for like every class if you are an exercise science major. And even if you aren't an exercise science major, I'm not saying you need to go out and buy it, but it does have some good information. Even if a lot of it is not good information. So the whole goal is to figure out who needs medical clearance before they can start training with you. Who might benefit from having some medical supervision, and then identifying medical conditions that would be like, no, you can't be part of an exercise program right now. So here's our screening algorithm, and we'll kind of walk you guys through this. So it used to be very, very complicated. The ACSM screening process used to be like, if you had a certain number of risk factors, you shouldn't exercise. And basically what they were finding was that we were preventing people from exercising by having all of these rules and regulations in the way. And so now it's been simplified to basically, do you participate in regular exercise or do you not participate in regular exercise? So if you do not participate in regular exercise and you have any sort of disease, even if you are asymptomatic, you need medical clearance. If you have any signs or symptoms of any sort of disease, condition, a cardiovascular, metabolic, or renal, you need medical clearance. If you don't participate in regular exercise and you don't have any signs or symptoms, you're good to go. So it's a little bit more common sense now. A flip side of that is you already do participate in regular exercise. Well, if you already do participate in regular exercise and you don't have any problems, then of course you don't need medical clearance, you're good to go. And you can progress to that moderate or even vigorous intensity exercise. Let's say you already do participate in regular exercise. You do have some sort of previous condition, but you're asymptomatic, meaning you don't have any complications from this disease. You're not required to get clearance for moderate intensity exercise. However, for more vigorous exercise, you would need medical clearance and then kind of progress with caution. And then the only one here is if you do participate in regular exercise and you have signs or symptoms, then you would discontinue exercise and seek medical clearance. But basically, what the ACSM was setting out to do is make sure we're not preventing people from exercising, especially people who are already active. All right, so here's one for you. And I don't expect you guys to know all the answers to this because there's a lot, and there's really no wrong answers. So what are some signs and symptoms that you should be aware of as you work with your clients? What are some things that might hint that you should like stop an exercise session or discontinue exercising and have them seek medical advice before continuing?
I think you should definitely stop if your client gets like white face, like pale, because they're probably gonna pass out. So like things like that, or like if they are having like an extremely hard time breathing, you should either slow down like dramatically or just stop to take like a long rest because they're probably just really overworked.
Yep. Both good answers, both correct. Anybody have any other ones?
You should watch for their coordination and movement to make sure that they're not like all of a sudden dizzy or look like they're about to pass out or something. Because
Perfect.
I don't know, maybe they didn't eat enough that day or other underlying reasons.
Yep.
And hi.
Hi, Grace. How are you?
I'm good. The meeting went well. So
Good. All right. So we talked about like head stuff. You're dizzy. Maybe you didn't eat enough. What are some other things?
If a
Like-
client's heart rate goes up really, really fast, should be
Yep.
careful with that.
Yep, exactly. So abnormal heart rate, or now obviously you are exercising, so you would expect the heart rate to go up a little bit, but something really crazy, that would be something to talk about. Or abnormal heart rate, like, heart palpitations, abnormal heartbeat. Jake, it looked like you might have had something to say, or did I already say it?
I was gonna say like signs of dehydration is like a big
Yep.
one.
Yep, perfect. So I have a long list here of all the things. They're kind of obvious. Like, I don't expect you to memorize them. Pain, discomfort. Obviously, there's going to be some of that because sometimes working out is it's not comfortable. But abnormal pain or discomfort, especially in the chest, neck, jaw, arms. So like kind of signs of heart attack. Shortness of breath at rest or with very mild exertion. Orthopnea or dyspnea, or like sleep apnea after beginning training. So that's actually a little bit more common, and you might have even experienced it yourself. Like first time doing a different, some novel type of training. Maybe you don't sleep really well at night because you're like breathing kind of hard and heavy. Dizziness, we already talked about. Ankle edema. So that's like swelling of the ankles. That's one to kind of keep an eye on. Palpitations or tachycardia. Intermittent claudication. So that's like the muscles are squeezing the blood vessels too much, and you kind of lose blood flow in extremities, especially in the lower extremities. A known heart murmur, or unusual fatigue or shortness of breath with usual activities. So a lot of those pretty obvious. Like if you were just any normal person on the street and you asked them, hey, I had heart palpitation, should I stop exercise? Yes. Pretty simple and straightforward there. We don't have a video. So here's some examples of a exercise pre-participation questionnaire. If you're a personal trainer at Campus Recreation, we already kind of take care of all this for you. Your client has to fill out a physical activity readiness questionnaire, otherwise known as PAR-Q, before they begin. And if they answer yes to any of the questions on there, then they have to get medical clearance first. And you would actually be surprised how often that happens. So the step 3 over here is, I believe, the physical activity readiness questionnaire, although it might be slightly different. So resistance training, pretty low risk. You'll hear people talk a lot about like, oh, lifting weights stunts your growth and kids shouldn't do it. And while there is different recommendations for different age groups, resistance training is pretty low risk, especially for like cardiovascular complications, and especially in low to moderate settings. So obviously, if you're anything done very vigorously can present some risks, but the risk of complication is low for low to moderate intensity exercise. So we talked about that PAR-Q. Some places have you fill out a PAR-Q plus, which just is the PAR-Q plus a couple extra questions. And that's like, you know, I don't have to take you through that. You can just hand it to the client and they can fill it out there themselves. Here's some additional forms that you might like to think about if you were kind of running your own personal training business. But like I said, the rec will take care of most of this should you become a personal trainer at the rec. So agreement to participate, informed consent, lifestyle and health history questionnaire. That's helpful for you to know as trainers so you can kind of understand, you know, when I get used to this person, how much can I really program? How much volume can I program? Because obviously if somebody sleeps five hours of sleep a night, drinks every day, smokes every day, that's a little bit harder to recover from than getting 9 hours of sleep a night and all they do is go to class and train. So that kind of guides your decision making when you're programming. And then a medical release if they do have any sort of problem. So that lifestyle and health history questionnaire, we just talked about that. Helps you kind of figure out injuries as well. Like if somebody has some knee issues, some hip issues, back issues, what sort of things you can and can't program. Medications and supplements, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. Like I said, lifestyle information, etc. Let's not talk about that. We basically already did. All right, so here's the fun stuff. Medications and what they do to heart rate and other physiological adaptations. So the ones we're talking about here are antihypertensives, so people who have high blood pressure would be taking these, bronchodilators, that is to open up the airway, and cold medications. So I believe I have something in the ReggieNet folder about the effects of these, it's also in the slides a little bit later, so we'll take a look at that. But this would be kind of something to study up on, if not for your personal use, just simply because some of the stuff is going to be on the exam. So antihypertensives can impact one of 4 different sites. That is, how do they get the job done? They get it done in one of 4 different ways. So they can either affect the heart and how hard it pumps. They can affect the blood vessels and how big or small they get, how much they dilate. It can affect the brain and the nervous system to either get a sympathetic or parasympathetic response. And it can affect the kidneys to reduce blood volume. So some other medications that were on there, bronchodilators, those stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. And then they increase exercise capacity when limited by bronchoconstriction. So somebody with asthma might need an inhaler with bronchodilator in it in order to get more airflow during exercise. Just out of curiosity, when I say sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system responses, does anybody know what that means, or does anybody not know what that means? Where do we stand on this? See, Grace has got some thumbs up. I don't expect you to know this, so if you don't know what that means yet, go ahead and chime in and we can talk about it.
I've heard it before.
Heard of it? Never heard of it? All right, so basically your nervous system has 2 different pathways, sort of yin and yang, I guess. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic would be like fight or flight. And parasympathetic would be like rest and digest. So your body goes through natural rhythms all the time. whether that be, daily rhythms, hourly rhythms, monthly rhythms, things like that. But at certain times, certain things, certain responses are more prominent. So during exercise, if sympathetic is fight or flight and parasympathetic is rest and digest, which one do you think is more active during exercise?
Sympathetic.
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty obvious there. But the more physically active you are and the more, right, your heart's pumping, you're getting your blood flowing, you're breathing harder, the more sympathetic the response.
Is that why they say like eat like a few hours before you work out, or like just so your body's in the correct system?
Yeah. It's not so much that, well, I guess everything has its kind of its own reactions. So whereas eating might trigger the sympathetic nervous system, if you eat too close to exercise, or I'm sorry, I think I said that backwards. Eating would trigger a parasympathetic response, right? Because you need to rest and digest. Say you eat too close to exercise and you start getting that sympathetic response. Now some blood is flowing to the working muscles and it's no longer doing its job in the digestive tract. So it takes longer to digest and you might get some stomach indigestion, things like that. And it's the same reason that maybe it wouldn't be so wise to eat immediately after you get done exercising, because you would rather be in a state where your body is ready to receive those nutrients rather than just slamming down a protein shake and hoping that just sheer consumption will get you huge. We can talk about that later as well. And then cold medications, so decongestants and antihistamines, stimulate vasoconstriction. So if there's vasodilation, that would be opening up the blood vessels. That would be good for exercise because you get more oxygen in the blood to your working muscles. Vasoconstriction would be closing them up, and it would be bad for that same sort of reason, right? Because you're not getting quite as much blood flow to your working muscles. However, it does reduce the volume of any sort of swelling you have. So, right, just because something is good for one reason, it might be bad for another reason. Vasoconstriction may raise blood pressure because if the same amount of blood has to get through that tiny space as opposed to getting through that big old space, it's going to be more highly pressurized to get through that tiny space. And then antihistamines may produce drying in the upper airways and cause some drowsiness. So just things to keep in mind there. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on what medications cause what sort of responses. I can cover it briefly, but any sort of really in-depth questions, I would say either consult the information that's in these, everything that's on ReggieNet, or maybe even consult the old Google machine and find a reliable source, not just a out of nowhere.com site. Okay, so this is that worksheet I was talking about, and I believe this is available in ReggieNet. If not, this might be something to come back to occasionally and just take a look at it so you can see the effects on resting heart rate, exercise capacity with each type of medication. So there's hundreds of thousands of like prescription medications out there, but just knowing general categories would be helpful. There's our summary. So your info that you gather during the health screening process not only helps you cover your rear end, but it also helps you make informed decisions on how you're going to program your clients. The information obtained in your health screening helps you make sure that everybody's going to stay safe. And then while you don't have to be a doctor and know exactly what every medication does, it is helpful to have a very basic understanding of the different categories of medications and what they might do to physiological responses during exercise. All right, we've got 2 out of 4 slideshows down for tonight. Does anybody have any questions as of right this minute? All right, what I want everybody to do, stand up, move around a little bit, stretch out, stretch your legs, screw your head on straight. Give it a couple of these, a couple of those, ready to go. I actually need that. This is more for me than it is for you guys because I've been sitting at this desk since like 11 a.m. So, yep. Maybe sit in a squat for 30 seconds or so. Got to move my old man bones around here. Go to the bathroom if you need to. Don't bring your camera with you. All right. Let's get on to this next PowerPoint here. So, chapter 6 is a 2-parter. There it is. That's the one I need. All right. That's what everybody wants to talk about, nutrition. I am going to, actually, give me just a second here. I think I might have had, I might have had a worksheet that I wanted us to work through tonight. Case study worksheet. So I believe this one has to do with, yes. All right, so remember when we talked about the, remember when we talked about that ACSM sort of like algorithm for who's cleared to exercise and who's not? Let's work through just a couple of these. There's a lot of them on here. We're not going to do all of them. So you can find this in ReggieNet if you go to here. I don't really know why. Let me grab a new tab, bring it over here. Can you guys all see my web browser right now, Google Chrome? No, you can't. Okay, let's do this. Oops, that's not what I want. This one, maybe? There we go. Can you see my web browser now? All right. So you go to ReggieNet. You go to Campus Rec Personal Training Course. You go to Resources. You go to week 2. You click on Case Study Worksheet. And then I would scroll down to these 2. And then you can just look at or listen to what I'm saying and kind of make a decision on whether or not this person is cleared to exercise yet. So we're going to work through these together. I haven't looked at them either, okay? Joe is a 35-year-old insurance salesman whose job requires him to travel every other week. He tries to engage in activity, but is inconsistent with the days he is able to exercise due to travel requirements. He's 15 pounds overweight, but is in good health otherwise. He does not take any medications and does not have any health concerns. Is he ready to train with us? Or does he need clearance first? And I can see everybody working through their little algorithm type sheet. What do you guys think?
I think he's ready, but I don't know.
Absolutely. So he is ready. And the reason why is because although he is not physically active yet, he is, he shows no signs or symptoms of any sort of pre-existing condition, and he doesn't have a known pre-existing condition. So as long as he's, even if he's not physically active yet, as long as he's apparently healthy and doesn't have any signs or symptoms, he's ready to go. Now, Jill, a 65-year-old retired teacher. She remains active throughout the week and enjoys biking and taking neighborhood walks 5 times a week for at least 30 minutes. At least 30 minutes. I wonder what that means. She's been doing that for the past 6 months. That's also part of the equation. So she's on medication for hypertension and has been diagnosed with angina. So she's got some chest pain. What do you guys think? Is she good to go, or does she need to discontinue exercise and seek medical clearance?
Clearance.
Yes, clearance.
Okay.
I think that if she might be able to do light activity, but definitely should get the chest checked out.
Okay. So the key words here, key things to look for are she is active. She's been active for at least 30 minutes a week, 3 times a week for 3 months. So those are our, if you read down here, I think it's in here somewhere.
You said 30 minutes, 5 days a week for 150, I thought.
Say that again.
I thought you said it was 5 days a week, or like it was like, or it was 6 months or something like that.
Yep. So that's what it says in here,
Okay.
but that's just giving us clues about what the actual.
Oh, you're referring to, I thought you were referring back to the question.
No,
my
no,
mistake.
that's okay. That's all right. I should have been more clear. I should have got to it faster. It's really what I should have done. So exercise participation, the definition that ACSM gives is planned, structured physical activity for at least 30 minutes at a moderate intensity on at least 3 days a week for at least the past 3 months. So 30 minutes, 3 days a week for at least the past 3 months. She checks all those boxes, shows she is physically active currently. So that means we're right here. She participates in regular exercise. Now she does have a known cardiovascular, metabolic, or renal disease, but it could be argued from this description that she's asymptomatic. Although she's been diagnosed and she is on medication, she's on medication for it, we could say that she's asymptomatic and is taken care of. Now, maybe a little bit more information would have been helpful to make this this decision. Like, hey, do you know, if we were talking to this person face to face, we could say, hey, do you have any symptoms, or are you good to go? And that would inform our decision. So I could certainly see both answers, but for this one, I'm going to go ahead and say that she is good to go for moderate intensity exercise. Now, if she had any signs or symptoms, then she would need medical clearance. Let's do one more here. We're going to skip. Let's skip Adam. We'll go to Maggie. Maggie is a 46-year-old nurse. She works 12-hour shifts, fluctuating between night and day shifts several times a month. As a result, she performs almost no physical activity other than the movement she gets at work. She does not have any noted health concerns and is not on any medication. What's the call?
Yes.
Yep, so she is good to go. She doesn't have any noted health concerns and she's not on medication. That was pretty easy. Let's do Adam after all here. 55-year-old basketball coach. His work requires long flights and bus rides from late October through the end of March. He's committed to living an active lifestyle and performs at minimum 40-minute exercise sessions 6 days a week. So does that tick our boxes for regular physical activity? Yeah. Yep, I'm seeing some head nods. Absolutely. So he is regularly physically active.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, it sounds like mostly, or maybe not even mostly, but it's like it all is dependent on whether they have signs or symptoms. Because if they're diagnosed, then you know what to do with that information, right? Like you know what they have, and so them being
Yeah.
diagnosed would never like steer you away from saying that they're not ready because they're already diagnosed.
Yeah, so I guess if they're diagnosed and all the symptoms of that that condition have been accounted for and they no longer have any symptoms, then I would put that in that box of no symptoms, and even if they have it, if they're physically active, they're good to go.
So, like, if you're diagnosed and you're still experiencing symptoms, you're still good to go because the trainer is aware of that?
No, they would just require medical clearance before they can participate in the exercise.
Okay, I don't know if I can think of anything, but like, I guess hypertension, right? That's
Yeah.
not something you can really, I mean, like a person just kind of lives with that forever, right? And so what would the medical clearance even do if we already know that they have it? Like,
Just
Yeah.
so you don't get sued, pretty much.
Yeah. So Grace is absolutely right. It's totally a cover your behind type of thing. Like now it's in the doctor's lap because they said that you can exercise.
okay.
So it's no longer the trainer's fault for giving you something that is putting you at risk because a medical professional said, hey, he was good to exercise. So let's finish up with this with Adam's case study here. So this routine is something he started after being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 8 months ago. Adam is interested in adding high-intensity interval training to his routine. His condition is being managed with diet and exercise, and his blood sugar levels have improved. However, he is still considered to be afflicted with type 2 diabetes. So what would you guys say here? And I'm willing to accept some different explanations because I think there could be multiple different answers to this depending on how we talk about it.
Well, it sounds like when in doubt, get the medical clearance.
Yep, that's where I would go.
Yeah, for high intensity.
Yep.
I
So
always, sorry.
go ahead.
I always forget which one you're born with and can't be cured. Is it type 1 or type 2 that can't be cured?
Type you're born with.
Yeah, type 1 you're born with.
Okay.
Type 2 is acquired.
Well,
Or perhaps not born with, but it can be,
yeah. A girl I grew up with got type 1 diabetes when we were in first grade, so we had to learn as a class what to do in case of an emergency for her.
I have a very similar scenario with one of my best friends from childhood.
Yeah, me too. I just always forget the number.
That's funny. Or maybe not funny, but yeah. So in this situation, I'm going to go ahead and lean towards, because although he is physically active, he wants to pursue more physical activity, like very vigorous intensity. And he does still have signs or symptoms. He has a known disease, and I guess it does kind of say that he's his condition is being managed, and his blood sugar levels have improved. However, he's still considered to be afflicted. So in my head, that's hinting towards that we want to get some medical clearance before we go ahead with this. Would you guys agree?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like in this case where it's kind of like it could lean either way, if this came up in the actual real world scenario, who would be the deciding factor? Would it have to be if you get medical clearance but the fitness facility, like, do they have to be like, it's too much of a risk for us, like, we're going to deny? Like, who makes the deciding factor if you get medical clearance?
Yeah, I understand the question. At least I think I do. So if you're doing business on your own, that is totally up to you. You know, as a personal trainer, working for yourself or as a contractor within a fitness facility, it's totally up to you whether or not you require your clients to get medical clearance. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still follow what the rules are. You know, I mean, I could tell somebody, sure, you don't have to get medical clearance, come work out with me if I was working for myself. Now, in a situation where we work at the rec center, I would say in every situation where you have a question about it, make sure they get that medical clearance. And that won't necessarily be up to you in a lot of places you work, right? A lot of places, the personal trainers don't have to handle the paperwork, and that's up to the facility. So this is a little bit more if you were doing business for yourself. But in that sort of situation, I would always lean towards the side of get the medical clearance and just play it safe. Does that kind of answer your question, or was I dancing around it a little bit?
No, it answers it. I was just curious because I know people who have, you know, diseases that are kind of like not debilitating or, you know, but, you know, it affects their day-to-day life, but it's very managed. So if they were working with a personal trainer, they'd be able to be like, hey, you know, I'm having a bad day with, you know, whatever the disease is. And they'd be able to like self-manage. So I didn't know if that was like in this picture, but you answered it though.
Okay. Well, so when I'm talking about all of this, I'm thinking from a pre-screening perspective. Like, somebody comes to you for the first time and has never worked out in this facility before. Even if they have done physical activity before, they're a first-time client of yours, and you got to make the decision: do they need medical clearance or not? In a situation where, you know, you've been working with this person for a while and they're, like you said, they're having a bad day with this condition, you can kind of play it by ear and sort of let you know how they're feeling, but just always proceed with caution. Like we said earlier, we talked about all the things of why you might need to terminate an exercise session, or you know, call it quits early to make sure everybody's safe.
So we don't have to keep talking about it forever, but I'm just saying, or one more question that, like, because we said that we need a medical clearance, or we said that they're good to go for people that have had basically no prior experience in terms of like exercise, and then people who have. So is it like the main deciding factor of the three between like past exercise, the signs and symptoms, and diagnosis, like the biggest one to look for would be the signs and symptoms?
Well, I would say the biggest one to look for is the participation in regular exercise. That kind of decides, like, if they participate already in exercise, unless something is going horribly wrong, we're going to let them continue participating. And the signs and symptoms or the known diseases are just kind of like an afterthought.
Okay.
And I guess that's sort of why this flow chart moves from, like, that's the heading. Those are the two different flow charts. Is either they do participate or they don't, and then there's some branching off of that. So I hope you guys are kind of getting the hang of this. Let's go ahead and get back to our PowerPoints. Here we go. All right.
Also,
Oh, yep, go ahead.
We can't see the PowerPoint. We're looking at your ReggieNet one.
Yep. I got to swap my display settings. Oops. You see it now?
No.
No? Okay. Let's do this. Now?
Yes.
All right. Let me, oh shoot, now I don't have my view. Holy cow. Man, this whole technology thing. It's rough, you know that? I feel like an old man. Okay, switch display. Oops. Dang it. We'll get there eventually. Doesn't help that this isn't even my computer, so I don't really know exactly how. All right. All right. Can you guys see my PowerPoint now?
All good.
Heck yeah. All right. We are doing good. Well, that's debatable, actually. All right. Okay, so here's what you need to know. We already talked about scope of practice in the first week. And you'll recall that it's outside of a personal trainer's scope of practice to provide specific nutrition advice. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't know enough about nutrition to be able to kind of hold a conversation about it. And, sorry, still battling. All right. And you can still provide some general advice to your clients. For that reason, because it's outside of the scope of practice, we're not going to spend a whole ton of time on this, and I'll try and get you guys out of here a few minutes early tonight. But let's discuss this, and I'm sure you guys will all have questions about nutrition, and I will do my best to answer them. Okay. So we just talked about it, but you guys go ahead and tell me where's the personal trainer's role in talking about nutrition? What are the sort of things that you should and should not talk about? Anybody?
Well, in general, with the scope of practice, it's if it affects exercise, which if you think about it, all of nutrition affects exercise to some extent. But like if a person is smashing a burger and a taco before they come, you might want to talk to them about it just so they don't throw up in the middle of the session.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have anything to say about it?
In regards to more in-depth conversation, like actually giving them a diet or meal plan or something, direct them towards a certified dietitian.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or
So
like,
oh, go ahead.
or like specific supplements you can't really recommend either.
Yeah, exactly. So you can share some very broad knowledge, but steer away from specifics. So we don't have a video. Here's our nutrition scope of practice. So ACE kind of holds the position that you should be able to talk about it, but not prescribe or diagnose anything. So you should be able to talk about principles, what is included in a healthy diet, what certain nutrients do for your body, deficiencies, needs at different points in your life cycle, pre and post workout nutrition and hydration, and then info about nutrients contained in foods or supplements. So basically being able to read a food label. Outside of the scope of practice, basically anything that is the job of a dietitian. So giving nutrition recommendations, performing a nutritional assessment, specific recommendations, counseling, recommending supplements, or definitely don't promote yourself as a nutritionist or dietitian. Because unless you hold an RD, you are not a dietitian. So here's some dietary reference intakes, and that refers to 4 different types of values. So you've got your recommended dietary allowance, your estimated average requirement, your tolerable upper intake level, and your adequate intake. So all of these means slightly different things, and you can kind of read these in the notes of the PowerPoint, but I'll move through those just a little bit right now. So the RDA is the level of intake of a nutrient that is adequate to meet the known needs of practically all healthy persons. If your consumption level is at or above the RDA, then you almost certainly consume a sufficient amount. The estimated average requirement is the adequate intake in 50% of an age and sex-specific group. If a person's intake falls well below the estimated average requirement, it is likely that the person does not consume enough of the nutrient. If the level is between the EAR and the RDA, then it's likely the client consumes enough of the nutrient, right? Because you have at least half of a likelihood. Bear with me here. I know this stuff is kind of tough to wrap your head around, but just bear in mind that all these things mean different things. The tolerable upper intake level is basically the most that you can consume without becoming toxic. And the adequate intake is what is sufficient to maintain good health based on some research. So kind of weird that there's so many different ways to describe it, but it's sometimes hard to do research on how much food to consume. So that's why there are different values for different values. So we have the, the 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines. So every 5 years they come out with these healthy people's, and that includes dietary guidelines. So there's a lot of different things that go into those, but it basically gives 5 big picture recommendations that are key to nutrition. So those 5 key guidelines for 2015 to 2020 are: follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan, limit calories from added sugars and saturated fat. No, I'm sorry. I guess I can't count. Focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. Limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats, and reduce sodium intake. Shift to healthier food and beverage choices, and support healthy eating patterns for all. So these are very, very broad, obviously. And you got to understand that as people who are interested in exercise, your outlook on nutrition is a little bit different than the general public's. So you kind of have to take all of this with a grain of salt. Like, they're probably going to tell you to underconsume things like protein, right? Because it's for the general population, not for people who train hard and want to build more muscle. So give me just a second here. Excuse me. Key guideline number 1, follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan. So they're basically trying to say that no matter what you are eating, whatever you're putting in your mouth, it does matter. It all counts. And everything you do is either positively or negatively impacting your health. So here's just some 3 types of healthy eating patterns. This is kind of a weird slide in my opinion. but here it is. So the government has what's called My Plate, choosemyplate.gov. And this is something that you can point people towards if you really they really keep pestering you about nutrition advice, and you got to be able to tell them something. The government has this wonderful website called choosemyplate.gov. It has a lot of nutritional information. Go check it out. So that's something that you can always direct people towards, and it kind of just makes everything simpler on your part, and it makes this information very presentable to a large audience. So there's the link if you want to check it out. Key guideline number 2, focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. So obviously, the more nutrient dense a food is, the more micronutrients it has per number of calories. And in general, the bigger volume of this food will have less calories than a non-nutrient dense food. So if you think about vegetables, lots of micronutrients, they take up a lot of space on your plate. You could eat a giant bowl full of peppers, or full of peas, or full of lettuce, or you name the vegetable, and maybe it'll be like 200 calories. You eat a giant bowl full of potato chips, might be 2,000 calories. So that's just sort of the thing. And those are things that you can tell your clients, right? Like those are very practical advice for like how to curb your hunger, how to make some lasting lifestyle changes. Like you don't have to be hungry all the time. Just eat foods that have a little bit less calories in them, comparatively. All right. So it talks about the value of variety. They're really trying to get out the idea that like you should eat a little bit of everything. Get some different colors on your plate: vegetables, fruits, grains, dairy, protein, and oils. So being able to kind of figure out what each one does and what categories it falls into. Let's do a little activity. And some of these have right and wrong answers, and some of them are like a little ambiguous and can fall into different categories. So let's go ahead and classify all these as vegetables. I'm wondering even what they want people to classify these as. Just a second here. Okay. So given those given these, let's classify these. Let's just do the first column. So potato, where does that fall in these?
Grain.
Yeah.
Technically, potatoes are a starch, so therefore it's a carbohydrate.
Right. So lots of different, we can put these into a lot of different categories. You could just call it a carbohydrate. You could call it a grain. You could call it a vegetable. And none of those would be wrong. Oops. I'm dealing with two different screens at the same time here. Salmon. What do we want to call that? And you guys can just shout these out, and I don't care if they're one of the categories that was on the last page.
Protein.
Yeah, absolutely. Walnuts.
Oil.
Lipid.
The nut.
Yeah, so fats. Also, nuts are kind of a hodgepodge of everything, right? Because they do have some
Protein to a degree.
Yep, they have some protein. They have some healthy fats, and of course, they have some carbohydrates. Grace, are you a nutrition major?
No, I'm a physical education major, but
Like
I
you have
just know a lot about nutrition.
Yeah. Have you taken some nutrition classes in the past?
No, my 8th grade year, I got misdiagnosed with an eating disorder, and one of their main activities there was take college level nutrition tests for fun. So
Yeah. How fun was that?
I mean, I've retained it, so.
That's good. That's good. I've taken like 3 or 4, like I've taken at least one nutrition class that was far above my understanding, and like I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And then I've taken some that at least make some sense. So I'm glad that some of this stuff has stuck for you, because a lot of that stuff can definitely fly right over your head, and you know, you put it down on the test and then you never remember it again. So
Yeah. It's interesting.
yeah, absolutely. Kale. What do y'all think about kale?
Vegetable.
Vegetable.
Mm-hmm. Yep, leafy green, nice and nutrient dense. Almonds. Like a
Protein, carb, lipid.
Yep. I don't even know what spelt is, so I'm not even going to
Is
ask
that
about
like spam or something?
I don't know. It seems like a fake word if I ever saw one, but let's go with
Oh, it's a grain. I just Googled it.
really.
Yep.
I'm going to have to look into that.
What does it derive off of? Like what plant?
Spelt, also known as dinkel wheat or hulled wheat, is a species of wheat that has been cultivated since approximately 5000 BC. The form of wheat. There you go.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Grain. Nice. All right, let's go with lean beef. What do you guys think about that?
Protein.
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 Yep. Certainly going to get some fats in there.
Yeah, but to a lesser degree.
Right. All right. Let's call it quits on these. You guys seem to all have a very firm grasp of that. And yeah. So guideline number 3, limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats and reduce sodium intake. So everybody kind of has a different opinion on apparently we're living at a time in history where like apparently eating meat is simultaneously like the cure to everything, and also like going to give you cancer and you'll die if you eat meat. So you kind of have to take everybody's opinions with a grain of salt, but this is ACE's stance and the government stance basically, that we should limit calories from added sugars and saturated fats. So added sugars, I think we can all agree with that. Probably not the healthiest thing in the world. You know, calories in, calories out, that's great, but we would like to be eating real food most of the time, and added sugars are by their nature not real food because it's added by human beings.
I think the standard is they recommend under, I think 26 grams of added sugars a day. So
Yeah, I think it's somewhere in there.
somewhere around there. I think it's a little more for males because obviously generally you pack more weight or body mass in general. But
And I won't expect you guys to know all the exact numbers, but just know general principles. Saturated fats, what foods might we find those in?
Processed stuff, I think.
Actually, for the most part, saturated fats, you're going to find those in animal products. So, like,
it's just anything that's not really a liquid.
yeah. And that's by its nature, because at room temperature, well, you guys know the science behind it. Basically, animal products like butter, red meat, things like that are going to have saturated fat. And then sodium. The recommended intake of sodium is, I think, under 2,300 milligrams per day. For the general public, good recommendation. Might be a little bit skewed for like athletes and more active populations.
I was going to say, because generally if you're exerting a lot of exercise, they make you take salt pills too, just because you need to maintain those electrolyte
and
levels.
somehow salt kind of got like a bad rap for being unhealthy. And I'm not entirely sure how that happened, because when you look at salt, it's actually, maybe one of the better performance enhancing substances out there. But for people who have hypertension, you definitely have to, if you have a history of hypertension in your family or in your own life, you definitely have to watch salt intake. But salt is not necessarily a bad guy. Just know that if a test asks you, salt is kind of a bad guy. All right. So you have a little diagram here about setting limits on everything. I don't want to go into that too much. It basically is just showing you how much sugar is in some different products. Key guideline number 4, shift to healthier food and beverage choices. Saying choose nutrient-dense foods. We already talked about that earlier. And then beverages. So once again, we're not allowed to give specific nutrition advice to our clients, but in general, it might be wise to say like, hey, just don't drink your calories. That's a really, really easy way to lose some weight, because they're not very filling. Chances are, if you're drinking your calories, it's probably some sort of added sugar, like soda, or like very, not very nutrient dense sources. Empty calories, as they are often called. I'm not so worried about that one. And then key guideline number 5, support healthy eating patterns for all. So everybody has a little bit different way of eating. Everybody has, different cultures have different, some cultures eat all the time. Some cultures eat very spaced out meals. Some cultures have religious guidelines that might affect what and when they're supposed to eat. So just keep all that in mind when dealing with your clients. Also have to be sensitive of food access. Where does this person live? Can they make it to a grocery store, or is all they have available junk food? Household food insecurity, and then cultural factors. All right, that's the first half of this. We're going to speed through the second half of this chapter's. Oh my goodness. We're going to speed through the second half of this chapter's slideshow. Y'all see that? All right. That's really weird. This computer is messing. Okay. All right. So we know none of you guys have clients as of right now, or at least not that I know of. But what is the greatest concern to you when talking about nutrition? Right? Are you worried that clients will ask certain questions that you won't know the answer to, or you don't know how to respond without stepping outside of your scope of practice? You guys let me know.
I think that they will think that you're like not informed, that you don't care, and that, they're going to want to find a trainer who they're going to want to move on and try to find another trainer that will be willing to, I guess, go outside their scope of practice.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid concern. And some trainers are willing to do that. And, what do you do? That's a tough line to walk. Anybody else have any concerns?
I think that if you're working with someone who does really good with working out with you, then goes, the rest of the week or whatever and eats like crap and then doesn't see any difference in no improvement, that they'll it'll look bad on you because it looks like you're not doing what they what their goal is. And so I think that it's nerve-wracking because you don't know what they do when they're away,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's just important to remind people that it's important to eat, to try to eat as healthily as possible, and just if as long as as long as you're reminding them and just reminding them, then that's pretty much all that you can do in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys are all presenting some very good concerns here. And the best thing that you can say is exactly kind of what I've been telling you guys this whole time is, unfortunately, as a personal trainer, it's outside of my scope of practice to provide specific nutrition advice. Now, I can give you some very general guidelines, and here are those general guidelines. Right? You can say things like, eat real foods, get some sort of protein, some sort of complex carbohydrate, and some type of vegetable at every meal. Consume some carbs after exercise. Things like that are ways that you can put some names to that. Foods such as, and then list off some foods that might be a good source. Those are some ways to kind of work around it and still get some general advice out there without stepping outside your boundaries. Food labels. Y'all know how to read some food labels? Yeah, you guys are all smart people. I know how you do that. So basically, there's just a little bit of a history about it. It used to be a total crapshoot. People were putting things on packages that weren't true and messing with the serving sizes to make certain things look more appealing than others. Now there's some rules in place to regulate that. Health claims between a relationship, describing a relationship between food and some sort of improved health outcome are no good. They have to be authorized by the FDA or based on some sort of evidence. Otherwise, that's against the rules. Reading your nutrition label, that might be something to talk about with your clients if they're interested. You can certainly teach them how to do that. That's not outside your scope of practice whatsoever. You can kind of make them understand what carbs, fats, and proteins all do. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because you guys are all smart and know how to read food labels. Food safety and selection, that's really outside of the scope of practice of this. I don't really even know why that's in here, and I don't think there's anything on the course about in the exam about it. But you should know like what temperature to cook chicken to, I guess, and stuff like that. Practical considerations. Now, this is something to talk about. When you go to the grocery store, maybe shop around the outside because that's where you're going to find all the real food and all the processed stuff is down the aisles. That's something that you can share with your client to provide a super general recommendation that is probably going to make a lasting, lifestyle change for them. Now they don't look in the aisles; they look in the perimeter of the store where all the real food is located. That's something that's great to suggest. And then, as always, just saying, hey, collaborate with a registered dietitian. I'm not going to talk about that. We are going to talk about fueling before, during, and after exercise. What is the primary fuel for most all exercise? What is the preferred fuel of your muscles? Anybody know? I know Grace knows. Somebody else besides Grace.
I believe it's carb, but it's definitely not protein.
Yes, absolutely. It is carbohydrates. Now, certain people and certain conditions are going to burn a certain amount of fat versus carbs, but as a general rule, carbs are always the preferred source of fuel for your body for exercise as well as your brain in those situations. So just being careful to consume enough carbs in and around exercise. We're not going to talk about the specifics of that, but I would certainly look back through the slideshow if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that. And there's a lot of great resources out there for nutrient timing. So getting some carbs in before exercise, to be able to fuel your training session, and then making that kind of paramount with your clients, saying like, hey, did you eat enough to be fueled up for this session, so that they no longer look at food as like a good thing or a bad thing or like a moral decision. It's like, no, it's just fuel so that I can do human activities. Yeah. They talk about a pre-exercise meal. So you want that kind of relatively high in carbs. So you get that available glucose for your muscles. You want it low in fat and fiber. It kind of says why here, but does anybody know why?
So you don't have to poop or anything.
That is a very good answer. But besides that, it just slows down digestion, right? Fat and fiber slow down digestion when we want to get those nutrients into our bloodstream so they're available for our muscles as soon as possible. You want to get some protein in there to minimize any sort of muscle wasting during exercise. Not that that's a very large concern unless you're training like totally fasted anyway. But just to have some of that available so that protein synthesis can start right away. They say approximately 400 to 800 calories. That's a pretty good range, but just making sure it's something that you can tolerate and isn't going to produce, lethargy. It's not going to, like Grace said, you don't have to go to the bathroom the whole time. Right before exercise is not the time to try something new. So as a rule of thumb, always go with what you know when it's before a training session, and especially for you guys who might be interested in, competition, strength training, things like that. The night before your competition is not the time to try a new restaurant or anything like that, right? You want to go with things that your body knows. It's not surprising. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. During exercise, so we just want to keep replenishing those glycogen stores. Short exercise bouts, probably don't need to eat during. Anything around like 3 hours, 1 to 3 hours of continuous exercise, you might want to get some sugars in there. Consumption during exercise, these are some kind of basic guidelines. So beverages are a really great way to consume it. So like Gatorade, Powerade, maybe in some situations like Pedialyte, but you do have to be careful with how many electrolytes you're putting into your system. You don't want to kind of throw off any electrolyte balances. They're saying consume in small amounts, 15 to 20 minute intervals. Then post-exercise. So everybody likes to talk about that post-exercise window of gains. Like if you don't get your protein shake in, you're going to lose all your gains and wither away to nothing. And maybe if you're trying to put on weight, it is a good idea to consume some sort of calories early and often, just from getting enough food in a day perspective. However, you're not going to waste away to nothing if you don't get in your protein shake right after your workout. That anabolic window is a little bit more like an anabolic barn door in some senses. Now, if you train fasted, it might be in your best interest to get in some sort of nutrients right away after you work out. But if you were able to get that pre-workout meal and you have some sort of carbs and proteins floating around, it's not very urgent to be able to get in some nutrients right this minute. So give yourself some time to cool down. You're no longer in that sympathetic state, and we can actually rest and digest. As it says here, the average client training at moderate intensities every few days doesn't need to worry about very aggressive fueling after an exercise session. But, let's say you're a high-performing athlete and you train all the time, every day, maybe even twice a day, it becomes more and more important to refuel right away. So that post-exercise meal, we want some protein and some carbs. Once again, pretty low in fat so we can digest it pretty quickly. And then the next few meals can be high carbohydrate as well for the next 2 to 6 hours. This is saying begin refueling within 30 minutes after exercise. Something to keep in mind, but like we said earlier, it's not like this dire, if you miss that 30 minutes, you're going to lose all your gains or, whatever. Fluid and hydration. So we're kind of finishing up the slides here. And basically what I want to say about these is, for all intents and purposes, drink when you're thirsty. Don't drink more than you're thirsty for, is a really good recommendation. So hydrate before exercise, during exercise, after exercise, but you don't need to drink any more than you're thirsty for. These are the actual recommendations. And obviously you guys all know the signs of being dehydrated, very dark colored urine. We're just trying to make sure we're drinking enough to support activity. So I actually don't even want to talk about that one, because that's not even a myth that I had even heard prior to this. I don't know. Have you guys heard this a lot? Like drinking fluids before and during exercise causes gastrointestinal distress? Yeah, I hadn't heard much about that, so I'm not too worried about it. And like we talked about earlier, when you are exercising, your gastric emptying time is going to be a little bit slower because your insides, the stuff that's doing all the digesting, doesn't have all the blood flow that it had at rest, because that blood flow is not now when you're working muscles. So it will slow down gastric emptying, although it's not going to cause like GI distress. Supplements. Everybody likes to talk about supplements. Basically, what you need to know is anybody can make a supplement and say that it does something, even if it does or doesn't do that thing. And there's really no regulation on it. So supplements are pretty darn iffy. The FDA doesn't have to approve a supplement for it to be on the market. It's on the FDA to prove that it does harm if somebody makes that claim. So not only are they not making these people prove what their claim is, it's actually the FDA's job to prove them wrong if it's doing some harm. So supplements, kind of iffy. With your clients, take a very conservative approach. Like, hey, here are the ones that are backed up by science. I'm not going to tell you whether or not to take them, but these are the ones that have been proven to be effective, and these are the ones that aren't. And here are the ones with that evidence. So of all of them, creatine actually is like very, very well researched, and most studies show that it actually does work a little bit. It's still not a magic pill. If you're worried about how much creatine you're getting, but you only get 6 hours of sleep a night, you're barking up the wrong tree. It's that last 1%. Don't even worry about it if you're not checking all the other boxes. Caffeine, that's pretty well documented that it works, and it's pretty easy to feel that it works as well. Carbs, that I wouldn't even say that really falls in supplement category, as well as protein. To me, that's food. It's not really supplements. So, of course it works. It's food. Sodium bicarbonate and beta-alanine. Those are on the list. I don't know a whole bunch about those. Other than beta-alanine is that thing in pre-workout that makes your face tingle. It's a vasodilator, so it opens up your blood vessels and helps blood flow a little bit more. But I haven't read too many studies on that. The best thing you could tell your clients is make sure you're getting your sleep, eating real food, training hard. If we're doing all those and you think you're doing the most you can with those, then maybe we can talk about supplements, but don't even worry about it for now. And then educate them on this list. Supplements without strong evidence, basically all of the rest of them. So the supplement industry is kind of hokey. The best advice I could give you guys would be to find a brand that you trust and a lot of other people trust, like a lot of other people trust, and don't take supplements unless you are really killing the game in all other areas. And basically what we just talked about, we have to be really careful about what we say, but people are going to ask the questions, so it's nice to be able to have some answers. Right? They need to consult their doctor when they're doing things like this, and that even says that on the supplement bottles and whatnot. So, and here's our summary. Personal trainers should educate their clients on how to read a food label. Obviously, we want to know what it is that we're putting in our body. Hydration, right? All of these things we can give very, very simple recommendations for, and not be steering people wrong. And always remember that scope of practice. That's why we talked about it in the first week, is because people are going to come up with you with questions that you're maybe not really allowed to give very, very specific answers on. Okay. So I know all of you guys tracked your week of workouts, or at least I asked you to for this week. Do me a favor, and if you have it written down on a piece of paper, just take a picture of it, send it to me in an email. If you have it written down somewhere, like in your phone or on Word or whatever, just send it to me in an email. Yeah, just make sure I get that. I hope everybody did the chapter 1 quiz. I'll check after we get off this Zoom. You can still turn it in late. I think you can turn it in as late as like December 31st. So if you forgot about it, just make sure you do that that week 1 quiz. For next Thursday at this time, please do the week 2 quiz. If anybody has any questions on those, please let me know. And every week that homework is going to be the same. So I think the only homework from here on out is just that weekly quiz due at 5 p.m. every Thursday, right before we start class. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff we talked about tonight? All right, so next week we get to get into, what do we have next week? So we get into some resting assessments and anthropometric measurements. So we're getting a little bit closer to like the meat and potatoes, what you guys all want to actually know about, and cardiorespiratory training. So physiology, assessments, and programming. So we're getting a little bit closer to the fun stuff. I know this stuff is kind of boring right now, and I appreciate that you guys are sitting through it so diligently and asking questions. And we'll get to the fun stuff in a little bit, okay? Hope you guys all have a wonderful week. Stay safe this weekend. Yeah, I don't think that there's anything left to say. So if you need to hang around and ask me a question, I'll hang out for a couple minutes here. But otherwise, you guys are free to go and have a wonderful week.
Thank you.